You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, July 11th, 2013. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Dr. Ronald Klatz will be joining us in hour number 3 of our show today to talk about anti-aging medicine and why people may not be really paying that much attention to it in these dark times, and sort of getting into that whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs issue. But obviously the top story of the day continues to be the George Zimmerman trial. The lawyers are doing their closing arguments right now. It's the prosecution's turn at bat. Earlier development, the judge has allowed the jury to consider a lesser charge of manslaughter, which carries a lighter penalty than second-degree homicide. Huge argument back and forth. The judge was losing her cool. A lot of people are wondering what the heck was going on with that. But there's a lot of political machinations around this whole trial and crime, and it's becoming more and more obvious ever since yesterday's revelation by Judicial Watch that they succeeded in prying loose from the Department of Justice almost 350 pages of documents showing that the U.S. Department of Justice helped organize and support all the protests against George Zimmerman. Remember, they went down there and said, oh, there's protests, he did wrong. And initially, the idea was that George Zimmerman wasn't even going to be taken to trial, because it just seemed to be a clear-cut case of whatever it was a clear-cut case of, and I don't want to get into the fine details. It's almost become irrelevant whether he's really guilty of anything or not. It's the politicalization of this issue and this trial that has a lot of people very, very worried. Now, already today on the corporate media, the Department of Justice has gone on the offensive against Judicial Watch. They're claiming that the versions of the documents that Judicial Watch have been altered to craft a meaning that isn't there. They have rushed out their own version of the documents to the corporate media, you know, with little sticky markers in there saying, hit this point, hit this point, hit this point. And earlier today on Fox News, I was watching this trained pit bimbo going after a representative of Judicial Watch saying, you left this word out, you left that word out. Is it possible the Department of Justice altered the version that went to the corporate media? Of course. They're in damage control mode. There is no legitimate law enforcement purpose for the Department of Justice to be spending your tax dollars down there in Florida organizing protests and demonstrations to fan up race hatred, which is really what it's all about. Yes, Virginia, there really are conspiracies. We've got another one. ClimateGate was one. This one is just melting down, but it seems like even with this expose, they're pushing forward on this. We're seeing all this race baiting and racism issue. They're trying to fan it up as hard as they can. The flood of very offensive posts to Facebook and Twitter about we've got to get Zimmerman if he's let off, we've got to riot if he's let off are continuing. Computer security experts are saying that most of these Facebook posts and tweets seem to be originating from only a few sources. Remember, we talked about how the U.S. government had purchased this software in order to allow intelligence operatives to pretend to be 50 or 60 individual people, and it looks like that software is being used here to create the illusion of a ground roots support for rising up in anger if Zimmerman is allowed off. Now, again, because the judge has now allowed the jury to consider the lesser charge of manslaughter, that's a good mid-ground. And I think if the jury goes that direction, it's going to diffuse this whole race riot potential scenario. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the ongoing trial of George Zimmerman. The prosecution is still making their closing arguments. It is expected the jury will get the case tomorrow on Friday, going into the weekend, and we will see what happens. But more and more online independent media, and even some of the corporate media, now that Judicial Watch made those documents public, in which the U.S. Department of Justice was using your tax dollars to go down to Florida and organize and support these anti-Zimmerman protests featuring people like Al Sharpton, who's not in the habit of showing up at these affairs completely for free. Somebody had to pay his costs to go down there. And they're starting to ask, you know, is the Obama administration organizing and stage managing this whole story? And the answer, I think, would be yes. Because right now, look at the nation from the point of view of the Obama administration. They're already in a bunker mentality. The NSA spying, Prismgate, all of that shows the administration sees itself as surrounded by potential enemies, 330 million of them. They were already in a mindset of being at war against the American people, against the Constitution, and against the states. And so right now, the Obama administration needs a major league distraction from IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, Prism Gate, NSA Gate, EPA Gate. I've lost count of all the gates. They need a distraction from the questions that are continuing to surface about Benghazi, especially during this confirmation proceeding that's in Congress right now. They need to distract from the fact that the indicators are the economy is about to take another 2008-like downturn. This whole Ponzi scheme bank and printed up money scam is about to come apart. We're actually hearing talk of impeachment in the halls of Congress now. Obama needs a distraction. He needs something that he can use to try and get Americans fighting with each other instead of all 300 million Americans looking at Washington, D.C. and say, you guys really screwed things up, didn't you? Are they taking advantage? Of course they're taking advantage of it. First law of politics, no matter what happens, the first thing you ask is, how can I use this to promote myself and my agenda? Never let a good disaster go to waste. And that's exactly what they're thinking here right now. Now, the ex-chief of police of Sanford, Florida, has gone public telling CNN and Fox News he was actually fired for not wanting to arrest Zimmerman. Now, when he was fired, the official story put out was that the city council had lost faith and trust in him, and it was an amicable departure. Now he's gone public and saying absolutely not. At the time of the Trayvon Martin killing, he didn't think there was probable cause to arrest George Zimmerman, that it did appear to him to be legitimate self-defense, and he was told by one of the city commissioners, all we want is an arrest. We don't care if it gets dismissed later. Which tells you it was a politicized operation right from the start. They wanted an arrest, even if it gets thrown out of court. Same thing the FBI does with all of these entrapments, where they'll have an informant concoct a terror plot. You know, we're going to hurl crumpled up newspapers at this government office, and I need you to help me. Get some suckers dragged in to get arrested for the headline. 6 months down the road, the court throws it out as obvious entrapment, but they get their headlines. They get the propaganda. Same thing here. Now, because of the outburst that happened with the judge earlier in the case during the hearing on whether to allow the jury to consider a lesser charge, there was some strange behavior by the judge, apparently in response to Zimmerman's not wanting to testify in his own defense. The judge grilled him from the bench, where even one of Zimmerman's lawyers was saying, what's going on here? And people are wondering, is there political pressure? Now, again, because of what happened with Chief Justice Roberts at the Supreme Court over Obamacare, people are wondering if judges are being spied on and blackmailed in this country. Did the NSA record the judge in a late-night phone call to Fifi's phone fantasies? You cannot rule it out, not in a nation where everybody's being spied on by the government. A lot of pressure, a lot of attention on this. there's a very interesting story circulating that members of the new Black Panther Party, not to be confused with the old original Black Panthers of the 1960s, but the new Black Panther Party are busing in thousands of people to Florida. Now, so far there is not much in the way of confirmation on this story. My first question is the U.S. Department of Justice paying for the buses? They're trying to fan up racial tensions. They would love race riots. Would solve so many of their problems here. We're seeing all these other stories down in Miami on the CBS affiliate there, local agencies prepping for potential violence, and they're showing how these, over the last couple of weeks, the police are out there learning how to, use their nightsticks and club people and taser and pepper spray, and the police departments are saying, oh, no, this is just regular training. It's just a complete coincidence that's happening right now as we come up on the verdict in this case here. Very bizarre story out of the Detroit CBS affiliate. According to a new Rasmussen survey, 37% of Americans believe blacks are more racist than whites. And I don't care if it is or it isn't. This is another obvious, pathetic excuse to keep racism before the eyes of America. They're selling that to you. Just like they were selling Osama bin Laden in the corporate media in the weeks before 9/11. And it was obvious it was a sales campaign. I was still posting over at Free Republic at the time. And in August of 2001, I actually wrote an article saying there's something going on here. The corporate media is constantly waving Osama bin Laden at us. He hadn't really done anything to justify that degree of media saturation. And we've been seeing exactly the same thing with this George Zimmerman trial, almost obsessive coverage of this trial. Murders happen every day all over the country. Why was this one picked out? For media stardom. Time magazine even hopped on board with a critical comment saying that for the police to prepare for riots, if Zimmerman is acquitted, that's an inherently racist attitude by the police and we should criticize them. And of course, nowhere in the story does Time mention this flood of Facebook and Twitter posts that have been out there brazenly promising there will be riots and looting and attacks on white people if Zimmerman is found not guilty. But it's just another excuse to keep that out there. They're fanning the flames of racism, and I know for young people it's probably a kind of a very hard idea to accept that our government would deliberately try and provoke hatred between the races in this country as a means of keeping us divided and easier to control. But it's not the first time they've done it. And over at whatreallyhappened.com, we posted a link to our page about the Black Panther coloring book. Now, this was something that happened back in the 1960s. You need to remember, the original Black Panther Party was not militant. Their agenda was guaranteeing a healthy breakfast to kids in the ghettos so that they could go to school and study hard because they were well fed. We have the same problem over here on the island of Oahu right now we're trying to address. And their other agenda was they wanted local control of the school curriculum. So the local community could look around and say, we need to train people to do this job, and that job so we can grow our economy. That was the original agenda of the Black Panthers. But they were also supporting the overall civil rights movement, which at that time was, quite strongly opposed to the Vietnam War and opposed to the draft. And so the FBI targeted the Black Panthers as part of their COINTELPRO operation. They had undercover informants infiltrate the group and start tricking them, luring them into more and more acts of overt violence with which the media could then demonize them. And the nastiest trick the FBI pulled was called the Black Panther Coloring Book. And we have a page on it at whatreallyhappened.com, including scans from the original book. And for anybody who's an artist, if you look at it, you realize it's not a coloring book. Because they're sketches. They're not the black outlines that you're supposed to color in. It's not really a coloring book. It's just a book of sketches. And it was all pictures about black people killing police officers and, images reviving the resentment about slavery. Just blatant propaganda. And it was distributed all over America. When I was living with my family in West Covina, California, we actually got one in the mail. I wish I had kept it. But I was very naive and trusting about the government back then. And, of course, the corporate media was going on, this Black Panther coloring book shows that these so-called representatives of the black community are violence-minded. They're planning on teaching their kids how to kill the police officers. And most of America, sadly, did buy it, and it increased friction, hostility, resentment between the blacks and the whites, so that the white population stopped listening to the legitimate grievances of the black population. Then in the 1970s, because of a leak, or actually a whole bunch of leaked documents, the FBI's COINTELPRO program was made public. And Americans were shocked to find out that the FBI wasn't this sweet bunch of Joes we saw in movies like The FBI Story, or TV shows like The FBI, a Quinn Martin production. And were actually going out there as these lawless thugs, sabotaging legitimate First Amendment protected free speech. Now, we're coming up on a commercial break here, and when we come back, more about COINTELPRO, more about the Black Panther coloring book, because this idea of the government trying to anger whites and blacks against each other is not new. They've done it before, which means they'll do it again. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about prior history, where the U.S. government, specifically the FBI, embarked on a covert, clandestine program to turn Americans against each other on a wide variety of issues in order to keep them divided and easier to control, easier to propagandize. And COINTELPRO, when it was exposed in the 1970s, brought the U.S. federal government to the edge of illegitimacy, and Congress was forced to act. And they held hearings where all of these dirty tricks came out. And Congress passed laws saying that U.S. government agencies are not allowed to engage in this sort of blatantly dishonest, unethical, dirty tricks, not to mention unconstitutional. Unfortunately, U.S. intelligence agencies act like they're above the law, and in any event, these COINTELPRO laws were rescinded by the Congress during the Clinton administration on the grounds that these tactics were needed to fight domestic terror. So with regard to the Black Panther coloring book, when I was living with my family in West Covina, California, it should have set off alarm bells that we, a non-black family living in a non-black neighborhood, should have received this in the mail. But like I said, back then we were naive, we trusted the government, we trusted the corporate media, and we took it at face value. And that Black Panther coloring book was exposed during the 1970s COINTELPRO scandal hearings as an FBI operation. They were the ones who printed it up and distributed it and got their assets in the corporate media to say, oh, look, those Black Panthers, look what they're doing. So you need to study the ways of the enemy, because the enemy likes to play dirty. They think it's their divine right to operate outside the laws. Laws, that's just for the serfs to follow. We are the nobility. We don't have to follow the laws. Now, getting back to this idea of why the Zimmerman trial had so much obsessive media focus, I put up a story. This was a flashback. This was covered in the New York Daily News about an attack where there was this 13-year-old boy who was white, doused with gasoline and set on fire by a couple of black teenagers. And it got virtually no mention in the corporate media. So these kinds of attacks happen all the time. Who is the body? Who is the individual who says, we need to make a big deal about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman? One of the readers of our website sent in a story regarding the so-called Wichita Massacre, December 2000, was another black-on-white crime. And apparently the dictum came down from Washington, D.C. to not treat it as either a hate crime or a race crime. Seems to be a bias there. So the government does tinker with these processes. And the government does love to set us against each other. So one more time, and I need all of you to get out there. And by the way, I was very gratified to see a group of young black students in Florida put together a rap video calling for calm. So good for them. Good on them, because right now race riots would just help the federal government so much. Don't be as stupid as the federal government is all hoping you will be here. All right, I want to spend a little time back on the Asiana Airline Flight 214 because it's getting into the twilight zone over there. You've probably already seen it on the corporate media that for a half hour after the crash, there were no ambulances. People were calling 911 saying, we've been on the ground 20 minutes, half an hour. We've got critical injuries. People are on the verge of death. Why are there no ambulances here? Which strikes me as extraordinarily odd. And there's another odd aspect. The NTSB is now saying that following the crash, the pilots delayed evacuation. I guess maybe they were in shock, but when you've had an airplane re-kit itself around you, the first thing you should do is get your passengers out as quickly as you can. And for some reason, they just sat there for a while here. Now, as you know, especially if you've ever read Michael Crichton's book, Airframe, whenever there's an airline crash, everybody wants to duck the blame. In fact, it used to be this sick joke that anytime there was an airline crash, the representative of the involved airline, the first thing they would do when they get to the crash site is throw a can of paint over the tail livery so that it wasn't presented there in the newspaper photos for people to remember. Oh, I remember that logo, that one plowed into a farm outside of Kansas City. I don't want to fly on that. And everybody's trying to duck the blame. And amazingly enough, we saw in USA Today an article, lasers remain a concern for aircraft pilots. I thought we'd covered this one last week here. And what they're saying now is the pilot is now saying he was temporarily blinded by a bright flash of light in the cockpit. Okay? Now, this chairwoman of the National Transportation Safety Board, you know, the same people who lied to you all about TWA 800, said it wasn't clear where the light flash came from. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And so we're looking at this article coming out of USA Today in which the chairwoman of the National Transportation Safety Board is out there saying, we have to be concerned about lasers as weapons to bring down airplanes. Now, the pilot himself said it was simply a bright flash of light. When he was asked if it could have been a laser pointed from the ground, the pilot said, I don't know. It was just a flash of light. Now, if you know laser pointers, they're monochromatic, very pure, saturated color. That's the first giveaway. If you don't have a lot of color in it, if it's just a white flash of light, that's not a laser. And don't forget, this crash happened just before noon on a clear, cloudless day. Sun pouring down, opportunity for chance reflections from rear view mirrors on airport service vehicles, windows, what have you. Reflections happen all the time. They're a fact of life for anybody who's a pilot. Now, what's going on here is, again, everybody's trying to duck the blame. If they can blame this on laser pointers of mass destruction, gets everybody off the hook. Crash wasn't Boeing's fault, wasn't the pilot's fault, wasn't the airline's fault, wasn't San Francisco's fault for not having the ILS running. Apparently, the co-pilot is saying he said there was a problem with that automated throttle system they were using to keep the speed correct on final approach, that it kept pulling their speed back. Is there a software error in there? Doesn't matter anymore. It was laser pointers of mass destruction. Now, I think they're out here trying to repush this whole laser thing because we've all seen that video from the protests in Egypt, where this government helicopter is flying overhead, leisurely, calmly. It is being bathed in high-powered laser pointers, especially those new blue ones. Those are like a watt in power. And they were just painting that aircraft, didn't change course, didn't crash, didn't have anything happen at all. And as I mentioned before, handheld laser pointers are not true lasers. They're a form of light-emitting diode. The light comes out, fanning out in a wide angle, and is refocused by a lens, usually from the lowest bidder. And while the beam stays very narrow over a short distance, like from you at the podium to the screen with the presentation you're giving, the fact is, over any kind of a significant distance, the beam does fan out. And when you look at how far downrange you have to be from an airplane in order to be visible to the pilot's eyes, you're talking a couple of miles there. And at that point, your average laser pointer, the beam is fanned out 100 or more feet across. Under bright sunlight near noon, you couldn't even see it, let alone be blinded by it. Plus, have you ever stopped to think how difficult it would be to hand aim a handheld laser from 2 miles away and hit somebody in the face? It's not a real threat. It's one of these made-up dangers the government likes to wave at you to prove that they're working to keep you safe from laser pointers of mass destruction. And they're trying to resell that idea using this crash in San Francisco, even though the pilot himself couldn't identify the flash of light he claims distracted him as being from a monochromatic source. So the propaganda just keeps going on and going on and going on here. We got a caller on the line, John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I want to continue with your subject of this crash and the flash of light and various things that, lasers and all this thing. Well, okay. The actual windscreens and cockpit glass of a modern airliner is electrically polarized. And any bright light, like the sun when you're above the clouds, it actually dims the screen. You don't want pilots inside the cockpit having to wear sunglasses and trying to read the instrument panel. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So these screens actually dim automatically, and any laser fired at it would trigger this dimming.
Well, you're correct. You're correct up to a point. Okay, you are correct. The modern, up-to-date aircraft, the cockpit windows can be electrically darkened to provide a more balanced lighting experience for the flight crew, but it works on a photocell sensor on the outside of the hull, and unless the laser hit that photocell sensor, it wouldn't have an effect. But again, by that range, the beam is going to be spread out so far. Under bright sunlight, you're not even going to see it, let alone be blinded by it. It's just a nonsensical idea.
But under that distance, that sensor would also be covered, from 2 miles or a mile away.
Yeah,
the beam would have spread so far that it would actually trigger that sensor. Technically,
you're correct, but the sun is going to simply overwhelm any signature coming in from the laser. And by the way, there is a latency in that dimming of the cockpit windshields. It's not instantaneous. It won't respond to a camera flash.
Actually, the modern ones are, Michael. You can now get this similar effect on welding masks, and as soon as you touch that spark, whoop, the screen is black.
I stand corrected.
I mean, and it is almost instantaneous. Well, it's so instantaneous on these systems now that if you do get that flash, you won't even register on your eyes. It is that quick. Milliseconds.
Well, that's a good piece of information to have.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll let you get on, Michael. I just thought I'd point that out. It's a total nonsense with these so-called laser pointers.
It is complete nonsense. I mean, the pilot is saying flash of light. He's not saying laser. The words are being put into his mouth. They're trying to resell this idea that it's okay for the government to spend your tax dollars to have Department of Homeland Security and TSA and Customs run around stealing laser pointers from the American people. They are not deadly weapons. Obviously, you have to use caution. Just like you wouldn't put a stick in your own eye, you wouldn't point a laser into your own eye, but over the kind of distances we're talking about, even if you had the kind of hands where you could actually aim that laser at the pilot's face from 1.5 miles, 2 miles away, the beam is simply going to be too diverged at that point. It really is. I ran a test on this laser I had here. I've already put it away. I ran a test on this laser, and at 100 yards distance, the beam was already about 25 feet across.
Well, I mean, on some of the laser instruments that I've used, the spirit levels and what have you, for setting up machinery and what have you, you can run this thing several hundred yards, and the beam is...
Yeah, but that's not a laser pointer. That's not a laser pointer. Those lasers are built to a higher degree of precision. And in many cases, they're true lasers with a resonating cavity, which does produce the kind of beam that you can fire at the moon, and it'll only be 10 or 11 miles across by the time it gets there. But those handheld laser pointers don't have that.
Well, you can tell a real laser from one of these light-emitting diodes, by simply looking at what surrounds. And if you look at a real laser, it's like paint that's got these little bright bits in, and there's little sparkles that happen all the way along. And this is because the laser is actually illuminating all the small parts of dust and what have you. And it's like the metal effect paint on a car. You can see these little sparkles.
You get that with a laser pointer as well, because I've certainly seen it a lot of times myself. Same thing with the strobe light. You know, if you're a hippie from the 1960s and you had strobe lights, you'd see the dust particles in your room. But the main difference between a true resonating cavity laser and these laser pointers is the resonating cavity itself. And the resonating cavity lasers will produce a beam that will stay coherent and focused over very, very long distances. These laser pointers are not designed to do that. How you tell the difference is look at the front. If there's a glass lens there, like a little tiny magnifying lens, it's just a diode. And these diodes do not produce coherent beams of light. The light just comes out fanning out and has to be refocused by the lens. And so what you're literally doing is you're projecting an image of that little tiny point on the diode from which the light is coming from. But the further away you are, obviously that projected image gets larger and larger. It's simple optics, okay?
The other seems to me relevant is it is rather reminiscent of the same aeroplane, the 777, that actually fell short of the runway at Heathrow and plowed into the approach. And the similar thing happened with this aeroplane.
Okay, so I know that this was only the second accident with a 777. It was the first fatal accident with a 777. So you're telling me the first time there was an accident with a 777, it also came up short on the runway?
Correct. And that was at Heathrow in London.
Well, that would suggest to me that maybe the co-pilot is right and there was some kind of a malfunction within the automated throttle control. And this gets back to what that other pilot was saying we talked about yesterday, that modern pilots are too dependent on the automated systems, and they really need to spend a little more time in seat-of-the-pants flying. The reason they're taught to depend on all the automated systems is to maximize fuel economy. They're flying these airplanes, you know, by the accountant's rules. The insurance companies are saying we'll charge you less for insurance if you're using all these systems. But if the systems are not working absolutely 100%, and we know American aviation systems aren't all that great, ask anybody who's had to fly the F-22, there could be problems. And they're all looking for something they can blame it on, where they can duck the blame and go back to business. Again, if you've never read the book Airframe by Michael Crichton, good time to go down to the bookstore and get a copy. You will like it.
Yeah. Well, what appeared to be the problem in this particular instance was that they were losing power, and the co-pilot was instructed to increase power because they were coming in under the ILS. But there is a problem. If you've got a piston engine, the power is immediate and it's there. But with a gas turbine, a jet, you open the throttle and it takes seconds to accelerate and increase that power.
Yeah, that's always been
when you're that close to the ground, you don't have that time.
Well, you know, one of the ways they tried to get around that on the first version of, I think it was the 757, the engines actually had baffles and throttles, and they could overrun the engine and then pull the power back with the baffle system. But I guess they decided it was a waste of money and a waste of fuel, and the 757s were retrofitted with more conventional high bypass gas turbines. But you're absolutely right. When you hit that throttle on a jet plane, it's not immediate. It's not like tromping on the gas pedal on your car. And, yeah, you can be already at the point of, if you're already at the edge of a stall, you're already too late.
You're already too late, yeah, precisely. And this is why these pilots need more seat-of-the-pants training, I believe.
I would absolutely agree with you on that one. And, again, inexperienced pilot in the type. And the lack of an ILS, they were on visual flight rule. Visual flight rule is really where you need seat-of-the-pants flying skills, eyeball skills, and again, it's just a horrible cascade of all these different circumstances that conspired to it. But again, as we have seen become a pattern in the United States of America, everybody looks at this and says, how can I use this to push my agenda? NTSB is out there pushing, oh, we must have laser bans. Americans are not allowed to have laser pointers anymore. And it's just complete nonsense. It's another way of saying, here's this imaginary crisis we've invented called laser pointers, and we will save you from them in exchange for more taxes and authority over you. And it's just a complete nonsense.
Absolute nonsense, Michael. Okay, I'll let you get on.
All right.
I just thought I'd give the audience the benefit of 16 years of flying in the Royal Air Force. But there you go.
All right, well, thank you very much for that insight here. I'm going to switch over to Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Going to Trayvon trial, we had a man a couple of weeks ago that dove into a creek and saved a little girl from drowning. She was 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't see her color. He just dove in, and she was a black girl.
Mm-hmm.
When he dove in, he hit his head, and he was paralyzed. Well, he finally died from that act of saving that girl.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be the big news, not news about someone killing someone.
I agree. You know, but
the man had died. His name was Michael Patterson,
mm-hmm.
and he dove into a creek in Howdy, Georgia, and he died. Now, he was just fixing to start a job and didn't have insurance, and
all righty.
You need to know something like this, you know.
All right, I just did a web search on him. I'll put that story up there because you're right. It's the kind of story we need to put up there, where this family man had his own family, saw this girl drowning, dove in and saved her, was injured in the incident, paralyzed, and apparently is now passed away. And you're right, it didn't get a lot of media coverage. We didn't see it nonstop.
Color didn't matter, Michael. Color did not matter.
Well,
the color of the person didn't matter, you know?
Color shouldn't matter, but again, going back to the 1960s, you know, our government tries to keep these issues up, to divide whites against blacks, men against women. We're going to be talking about that later in the show. Young against the old. Just keep divide and conquer, keep Americans squabbling with each other in order to prevent us from uniting together as 330 million Americans, all upset and angry at private central banking and a government that has sold us out to those banks, to Israel, to the military-industrial complex, to the security-industrial complex, to Monsanto, to big oil, on and on and on and on. And that's why they're trying to use this to try and get, the big problem in America is race relations. And I think probably when this thing first kicked up with Trayvon Martin, it was being thought of as a distraction. But right now, I think looking at the situation from the point of view of the White House, with all these problems that they're dealing with, race riots would be a really convenient distraction right now. And I think they're pushing for them.
Michael, the family needs help. The boy didn't have insurance. The man didn't have insurance. And this should really be publicized a great deal.
Well, I'll put up the story. I'll put up the story at my website, and we'll let people take a look at that. Okay?
Thank you, Michael.
All right. There's a lot happens every day in this country. It's 330 million Americans, 3,000-mile wide country, not counting us little offshoots like Alaska and Hawaii. There's stuff going on every day. I mean, I know they call it reality television, but it isn't very real, and it certainly doesn't cover all of real America. Most of real America is very, very boring to corporate media. It was kind of the statement that we made. My wife wrote that song, I Stand Amazed, and we put it together with all these photos of very happy married people who listen to our show and read our website to sort of celebrate happy marriages that go unremarked by the corporate media just because they are happy marriages. Oh, they're happy together. We can't make a news story out of that. These people are living together in peace. We can't make a story out of that. These people are helping each other in community. Well, we can't do anything about that either. We need blood. We need dirty laundry. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Getting back to the George Zimmerman trial, the judge has ordered a recess in the middle of the prosecution's closing arguments. I guess the jury was starting to doze off or something. So they're going to run this out for the rest of the day, and more than likely the jury will get the case tomorrow. General rule of thumb, acquittals come very quickly. Convictions take a little bit longer. So that's a good way to sort of read what's going on. If the jury gets the case and an hour later they say the jury has a verdict, it's probably going to be acquittal here. Now let's get over to Floodgate. We do not want to take our attention and focus off of all these scandals that are lapping at the ankles of the president and his administration. The NSA spy scandal continues to have repercussions around the world, economic, diplomatic. Apparently over in Luxembourg, their Prime Minister Jean-Claude Juncker has been forced to resign after failing to convince lawmakers that he was not responsible for that country's spy scandal. It's ricocheting all over the place here. Ron Paul has made a comment about the NSA saying all of this spying is really about justifying their budgets, justifying their existence, justifying their continued employment. And this gets right back to an observation I made when all of this stuff started coming out there. You have this multi-billion-dollar global network harvesting data from Facebook and thinking that's a reliable source of intelligence on what the American people are doing? Of course it isn't. And we already know there was a report not too long ago where ever since this NSA spying went public, real criminals are resorting to encryption on their text messages, and the police are openly admitting they can't read some of the messages. So it doesn't really work. Call it the security industrial complex or the intelligence industrial. Well, there's not much intelligence in it. In fact, there was a very interesting story that was on Fox News earlier today where studies are showing that your average college student makes better, more rational choices than people working for the intelligence agencies. And that's actually not too surprising because I've had brief contacts with the spooks throughout my life. CIA actually tried to recruit me when I was working at CBS Television City, and I was, to put it mildly, not very impressed with them. It was just a gang of people playing dirty tricks to advance themselves, and really didn't seem to be in the best interest of the nation to get involved with that kind of a situation. But Ron Paul is right. They're fighting to keep this thing going because they understand the economic times are hard. If all these intelligence spooks have to try and get a job in the private sector, they may not be able to find a job, and certainly not one that pays as well as a government job. Your average government worker makes 30% more for the exact same job done in the private sector. That's what keeps them loyal. That's what keeps them dedicated. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I guess the recess is over, and the prosecution is continuing its closing arguments in the George Zimmerman case. And everybody's just sort of marking time, and we'll see what happens here. All righty, let's see. Getting back to NSA Gate, 2 human rights groups in France have filed a lawsuit in Paris demanding an investigation into whether the United States violated France's privacy laws by secretly collecting massive amounts of personal data on law-abiding French citizens. Of course they did. Every country has laws protecting the privacy of ordinary people. Again, we understand when governments spy on governments. We understand when governments spy on the foreign military. The problem here is spying on their own law-abiding citizens who are doing nothing wrong other than perhaps standing up and saying, I don't agree with certain things this government is doing, like spying on ordinary law-abiding people. So the France-based International Federation for Human Rights and the Human Rights League are basing their complaint on the disclosures by Snowden and prior NSA whistleblowers of this completely unrestrained dragnet fishing expedition surveillance on people around the world. Meanwhile, Mexico, Chile, and Brazil are joining the rest of the Latin American nations in demanding answers to what's going on here. The United States is taking a major hit in its reputation, in its image, from this scandal. And again, those of us who have been studying what the government is doing wrong have known all along this stuff was going on. And most Americans, I think, lulled themselves into a false sense of security that, hey, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I've got nothing to worry about. Wrong. Now Americans are awake. We are seeing, in the wake of the NSA scandal going public, these large, major online providers that cooperated with the NSA are losing customers. And apparently there's another search engine out there called DuckDuckGo, which as a policy does not track people who use the search engine and does not sell that information with anybody else, or at least that's what they're saying, and right now their business is booming. People are leaving Google and Bing and Yahoo and going over to search engines that don't save information and don't track. Let's see, what was one of the other ones that we needed to look at was StartPage. StartPage.com is another one that doesn't track your data. People are very concerned. They're starting to use proxies. They're starting to use Tor. They're starting to get cases to isolate their phone when they stop someplace on the way home that they don't want the NSA to know about here. So there's a huge public backlash, and it's going to be financially felt by those companies that went along with the NSA spy program. Americans are angry, and they have a right to be. Meanwhile, one of the founders of Pirate Bay, Peter Sund, we talked about this the other day, he's announced his desire to produce a messaging platform for tablets and smartphones that will be impossible for the NSA to spy on. And he's seeking investment for it. He's crowdfunding this product. Well, it's a nice idea, but it's not really going to work, and I will explain why when we get back from these messages from our sponsors. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443, and we will be right. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The prosecution is wrapping up their closing arguments in the Zimmerman case. Apparently, the judge has decided they're going to wait until tomorrow morning for the defense to make their closing arguments. We're getting a report of an explosion in Manhattan. At this time, it's thought it's either a transformer or a steam explosion. So, we're not going to cover that. If we can't blame it on Arab Muslims, it's not news. So before the break, we're talking about Pirate Bay founder Peter Sund is seeking investment to develop an NSA-proof messenger app. That's his selling point. It's going to be NSA-proof. And I'm sorry, Peter, that's not going to happen. Because as I've explained many times before, if the method of the encryption is known to the NSA, all it takes is racking together enough computer processors to brute force the necessary keys. Now, of course, if we're all using encryption, that's going to increase the workload, and that's a good thing right there. But claiming it's going to be NSA-proof, I'm sorry, that is not going to happen unless you're developing your own methodology and writing your own software. And so, nice try, and I'm sure he's going to get his investment. He's probably going to make a lot of money selling this. And I think it more accurately ought to be described as NSA annoying, NSA irritating. But once the method is known, it's only a matter of time before the keys are found here. Meanwhile, over at the Kremlin, they have decided they're going to go back to manual typewriters to avoid all this computer snooping by the United States government. And apparently this is coming out of Russia's Federal Guard Service, which is in charge of safeguarding Kremlin communications. And they're going to return to typewriters because of all this talk about NSA spying on fiber optic cables. That's the latest leak. They've used taps into fiber optic cables at the floor of the ocean to get all of the world's communication there. Reminded me a little bit about this movie called Mercury Rising, where these NSA workers who are caught in the middle of some very bad activity, like aren't they all, are trying to figure out how they can send a letter to Congress blowing the whistle on their boss, and they buy an old manual typewriter and say, low-tech rules here. Now, it sounds good, and it's certainly going to make interception more difficult if you're not plugged into the computer, but typewriters do have weaknesses. If you're using a typewriter that uses a mylar ribbon, like the IBM Selectric, everything you type is visible on that ribbon because it's a use once and shift. That's how they get that crystal clear type that comes out of those. Anybody who gets that used ribbon out of your trash bin has a record of everything you typed on that typewriter. Now, for all typewriters, including those that use the cloth ribbons that go back and forth and don't save your messages. Back in the 1960s, the FBI actually worked to develop a system that would deduce what was being typed in a bugged room based on the fact that when you're typing on a typewriter, each key makes a slightly different, unique sound from all the other keys. I don't know how successful they were with it, but I did understand that that was one of the projects that they were pouring a huge amount of money into. And I imagine with a manual typewriter over time, certain keys will become more worn than others, like the letter E gets worn out very, very quickly here. Now, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, and this is coming out of WashingtonBlog.com here, the NSA is tapping all data from main undersea phone and internet cables, which are now mostly fiber optic. Now, way back, and this goes back to some of the stuff that Dr. John Craven was talking about, the U.S. was using these modified submarines for intelligence operations where they would sail into harbors that belonged to, well, the Russians, and they would wrap these inductance taps around the undersea cables, where the electrical signals flying through could be detected and read off and decoded. Obviously, fiber optics makes it a little bit more difficult. And the story coming out of all of this is the U.S. government took the last of the Seawolf class submarines, the new Seawolf. They only built 3 of them. The last one was the USS Jimmy Carter. And if you look at it, it's actually a bit longer than its 2 predecessors, because in the middle of the submarine, there is a lockout chamber, so that this submarine, while underwater, can deploy Navy SEALs, little tiny mini subs, and obviously tools with which to tap fiber optics cable. And the method is simply that the submarine will park itself over one of these fiber optic cables. They'll drag it up into this moon pool, because you can't open up a fiber optic cable inside the water or it'll stop working until you dry it out. And they basically go in and put in whatever they're doing to tap these fiber optic cables, and now it looks like they've basically done it pretty much all over the world. And so that's why we're seeing governments start to say, all right, we have to de-link from the net. That net is not our friend, it is our enemy. Same attitude you should have about your smartphone and your tablet. Another story that we saw out of RINF.com, the government's apparent interpretation of the Patriot Act is everything is relevant to the war on terror, therefore they have permission to spy on everybody. And I think for most Americans who understand they are not terrorists or even terrorist sympathizers, the fact that the government is spying on them is very angering. It's unconstitutional, as we pointed out earlier in the week. An NSA whistleblower on ABC News came out and said, yeah, they're listening to sexy phone calls from our serving troops and around the world. They're calling their partner back home and saying, ooh, baby, if I was with you, I would get out the orange marmalade and I'll let your imagination take over from here. And if it's really juicy and really hot, these NSA people are just trading it amongst themselves. Hey, play this MP3. This one's really going to rock your world. Now, needless to say, a lot of the reactions we're seeing about this whole NSA leak and Snowden bespeak a great deal of panic in the halls of power. And there is a new, obvious, and I would say tragically pathetic hoax that is now appearing on the Internet. It's showing up quite a few places, supposedly from a source called the Internet Chronicle, which nobody can seem to find has really ever done anything or been around for all that long, claiming that Edward Snowden is leaking information confirming that the U.S. government is keeping captured UFOs hidden in the deserts of Nevada. So they're out there trying to kookify the whole Snowden issue. And again, that's a well-worn propaganda technique that we have seen. We get emails all the time here about UFOs and HAARP and chemtrails and all that other stuff to try and trick the website and the radio show into saying something that the corporate media is saying, oh, those people, they're Bigfoot lovers. You don't listen to them about anything. They think there's flying saucers and so forth. So now they're trying to do it with Edward Snowden. And of course, there's no source, no site. It's just, we have it on good authority that Edward Snowden is leaking this critical information about UFOs and captured space aliens, and even the independent media won't cover it because it's just too shocking. These guys are really kind of predictable. They really are. And again, it reminds us These propagandists inside the government and the corporations are still trying to play the game by the rules that worked at the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and the 1960s, when Americans were very naively trusting the government and the corporate media. We'd all been brainwashed to wet ourselves when we heard the word commie and to salute the flag and throw our children onto the designated enemy's bayonets. But that world doesn't exist anymore. We are a sadder but wiser people. We know the U.S. government lies to us, Saddam's nuclear weapons being the most recent famous example. We know the government tries to intentionally sow discord among the American people to keep us quarreling amongst ourselves because of the COINTELPRO scandal. And one of the most positive reasons to think that we're going to have a good outcome from this crisis, meaning the U.S. government simply collapses the way the former Soviet Union did, is because they can't adapt to the new reality of an independent media, of the blogosphere, of Americans communicating with Americans without going through some controlled conduit. At NBC, the National Broadcasting Castration. Interestingly enough, every year there is an annual conference for computer security experts, meaning it's a conference for hackers. And it's called DEF CON, a reference to the defense condition code that the U.S. government uses, where, you know, something happens, we're at DEF CON, defense condition green, defense condition red, defense condition peach, taupe, and mauve. They're really big on color codes here. This year, the organizers of DEF CON have disinvited representatives from the United States government and United States intelligence agencies. They don't want them in there. When you're being kicked out by the computer criminals and the hackers and the security experts, you know you have really angered a lot of people. And it continues. Hewlett-Packard, red in the face, is shuffling their feet and having to admit that there is an undocumented administrative account in its store virtual products. They're promising there'll be a patch soon. Now, the store virtual products are mass storage devices that do not plug into your computer directly. They sit on your local area network as shared resources for multiple computers. We used to have one as a backup system here, and it died 3 days out of warranty. And they are, like any other host on that network, you have to log in and gain access with a username and a password. And now it turns out there was this hidden account with full admin privileges on these storage products, which meant anybody coming in to your LAN from outside could log into this drive and see what your files were, regardless of whatever protection you'd put there. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, of course, before the break, we were talking about how it turns out this Hewlett-Packard mass storage device, whole line of them, that sits on your LAN to be shared by multiple computers, had a hidden administrative login account. And if Hewlett-Packard is doing it, they're all doing it. All these off-the-shelf systems are being compromised. So, if you have data you need to hide, like your bikini picture collection, you put it on a USB drive, and when you're not drooling over the babes, you unplug that drive and you put it away someplace. Now, there's another story. This came out of Business Insider, calling attention to the fact that the Facebook application for Android, if you read its terms of use very carefully, it openly says the Facebook application can activate the camera or the microphone on your phone without your confirming it. Which means that while that Facebook application is running on your Android, even if it's not present on the screen, it can open a door to that camera and microphone for whoever's on the backside of that Facebook link. So, by the way, something I noticed the other day, remember when Wi-Fi first came around and laptops that had it had a physical switch that you could slide off, because even back then it was proving to be a major security problem? And all the newer machines, Wi-Fi is turned on and off through a key click, a hotkey, which means it's done in software now. That raises the possibility that your Wi-Fi could be activated remotely That it's not really off, it's simply in I'm going to ignore everything mode because I'm pretending to be unconnected until it hears a certain Wi-Fi signal that switches it on remotely by that suspicious-looking van sitting out there by the end of the street there. Now, again, getting back to this idea that the reaction of the federal government to the exploding NSA scandal and all these other gates that are going on, they're getting into this bunker mentality. They see it's even worse than Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is acknowledged to have been paranoid. Everybody's out to get me. They all hate me because I'm the president. And we're in a worse situation now. And Obama's attitude regarding leaks from within the government is basically saying you're aiding the enemies of the United States, which is a very bizarre situation when you realize that most of these leaks are to the people of the United States. Now, what Obama's really saying is leaks are aiding the enemies of my administration. Leaks are aiding the enemies of the federal government. And that's not the same thing as the nation. Even all the way back in the Clinton administration, they were already out there saying, you can't say you love your country and hate your government. And the subtext there was, the government is the nation. I am the state, Louis. And so there's, let's see, there was a Defense Department strategy document from June of last year. It said, quote, hammer this fact home. Leaking is tantamount to aiding the enemies of the United States. So this is a government now obsessed with secrecy. Not your secrecy. They don't think you should have any. No secrecy, no privacy, but by golly, they got to be secret. Like that little stunt they did where the Pentagon has erased, deleted all of the files regarding that raid in Abbottabad where they killed this old man and then tried to tell us it was Osama bin Laden after they dumped his body in the ocean. And all those files are now over at the CIA, which is allowed to keep things hidden much longer than the Pentagon. They're doing the 3-shell game with the information, which tells you they got something to hide about it, like it wasn't really Osama bin Laden. And, of course, a lot of people are commenting, this is over at RINF.com, where Obama is just carrying this all-out global war against Edward Snowden. I'm going to get you one way or the other. And he's literally throwing their weight around, threatening countries. Don't you dare allow them in. Don't you dare allow him in. They forced down that plane of the president of Bolivia. Huge diplomatic brouhaha about that. And a lot of people, this is over at antiwar.com, a lot of people are saying our government is clearly acting above the law. And reminding us all that fidelity to the rule of law is the centerpiece of what America is supposed to be, meaning we all equally abide by the law up to and including the president himself. No one is absolved of the obligation to comply with the law. If it's wrong for me to do it, it's wrong for the president to do it. The president has certain added authorities that he's allowed to use only when he operates within the framework of the Constitution and the imposed limits on his authority. We were talking about that yesterday with Obama simply saying, I'm not going to enforce this particular law of Obamacare. That's not up to him. The Constitution says the president's job is to carry out the will of the Congress. The president is not the boss. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And speaking of Barack Obama, yet another gate is opening up around him. I guess we could call this one Plum Gate, because members of Congress and quite a few career diplomats are very upset over the fact that Barack Obama has been appointing a large number of his top campaign fundraisers to ambassador posts around the world. Now, I understand that the appointing of an ambassador is a presidential perk, but most presidents generally try and find ambassadors who are going to actually be effective at maintaining relations between the United States and whatever nation this ambassador is in. We know it doesn't always work out. Israel's had a tremendous problem with misbehaving ambassadors around the world. And yeah, sometimes friends are picked to be ambassadors, but in this case, So far, 18 of Obama's ambassador appointments have gone to his campaign fundraisers. And a lot of people are saying, what the heck is going on? Is this a return to Chicago-style politics? And the answer is, yeah. Alrighty, let's see. Another story over in Britain. Yet another person has died after being tased by the police. Apparently, police were at his home, and they said, oh, he's got a knife in his own hand, in his own home. They're not even saying what kind of knife it is. But they apparently tased him. Young man. Perfect health. And he dropped dead. And remember, we have had cardiologists on this show that point out, contrary to the propaganda and the sales pitch that this is a non-lethal device, if that 30,000-volt jolt hits your heart at exactly the right point in its beat cycle, the heart simply stops. The only thing you can do at that point is tase him a second time and hope that kicks it back up again. But these tasers do kill people. And the police are completely off the hook for it. They're saying, I just tased him. If he died, it's not my fault. The manufacturer says this is non-lethal. And every police department here in the United States of America that has dealt with a taser-caused death has basically come back and said, oh, obviously there was some unknown medical problem with the victim. We're never to blame. Tasers are non-lethal. Actually, tasers are police beatings with all the modern improvements. Another story, this one out of Dayton, Ohio. Another SWAT-type insertion raid into the wrong house. Guy woke up in his bedroom with a gun to his head. They took him outside, handcuffed him, left him on the sidewalk in front of the house. And then they came out and said, oh, we're sorry, got the wrong place. Released him and left. That's it. I don't think that's acceptable at all. It's one thing if a police officer walks up to a house and knocks on the door and he's got the wrong door, that's not a big problem. But when you deploy that kind of militarized force, dynamic entry, guns, gas, tasers, whatever, where you're grabbing people and physically assaulting them, please check your targets. Anybody who's gone through a gun safety course knows you check your target before you pull that trigger. The police should be checking their targets before they start kicking down doors. Apparently they aren't. Huge problem. We posted a map about all these botched dynamic entries in the United States the other day. It's epidemic. These are not isolated incidents. It's happening everywhere. Yet another embarrassment for the police. This was in the Daily Mail, where over in St. Paul, this cop was caught on his own police car's video recording system pepper spraying a suspect who was already handcuffed in the car, lying down on the back seat under control, and the cop takes out his pepper spray and just fills the guy's ear with it. And he starts screaming because it burns in your ear as much as it burns in your eye. It was obviously gratuitous brutality. And they'd already beat the guy up on the sidewalk. Meanwhile, down in Florida, another scandal emerging there where apparently this woman has come forward to say that she was sort of a groupie, sometimes consensual, sometimes coerced, for a group of nearly a dozen police officers, where she was basically having sex with them in police and fire stations, patrol cars, even a parking lot at a memorial service for a slain officer. All on the taxpayer's time, by the way. It's one thing if you've got a groupie that wants to hunt police and fire on their own time. So there's a huge scandal down there as well. And by the way, most of these police officers and firefighters, yeah, they were married. Now, I want to get back to this Henderson, Nevada case, because it's attracting a lot of attention, because the homeowners whose homes were invaded by the SWAT team to use as a command post, observation post, are invoking the Third Amendment to the Constitution as their grounds for a lawsuit. And this is a legal point that really hasn't been used an awful lot. It's about the quartering of troops in-home without consent, which was a very common practice by the British government when they were in charge of the country. It was a way of basically transferring the cost of maintaining the occupation force onto the people being occupied. And, of course, if there was a soldier in every third or fourth home, it discouraged people from talking with their neighbors about what's going on, kind of like what they're trying to do with the NSA spying. And so constitutional scholars are taking a look and saying, does it really apply? And I would say, definitely when you have a militarized standing army equipped with fully automatic weapons, armored cars, hollow point ammunition, tasers, tear gas, flashbang grenades, yeah, that's a standing army. Now, the James Holmes case is now heading to trial, and his lawyers are saying, yes, he did in fact do the shooting at the movie theater. Kind of hard to say he didn't. Too many people saw it. They are going for an insanity defense, saying that he was in the throes of a psychotic episode at the time. Ta-da! Wasn't the mean old guns. The gun didn't make him go on the mass shooting. He was having a psychotic episode, which is arguably true. And the question we need to ask is, what prescription psychiatric medications was James Holmes on or withdrawing from at the time of the mass shooting? They still want to blame the guns. But again, go back and look at ssristories.com or look at my own page of collected information. There is a long and well-documented case of these medications triggering acts of complete unreasoning violence and suicide. There's a case in Britain right now where a man who murdered his mother is saying, I was on these pills and they just made me do crazy things. This stuff is dangerous. It's as dangerous to Americans' health and safety as fracking, GMO, more oil and gas pouring into the Gulf of Mexico, but it's making money, and that's all that really counts in the United States of America. Don't you dare stand up and challenge anything that makes a profit in this country, because we're a fascist economic dictatorship. Now, apparently, Google has put out a new app in their Google Play Store called Gun Geomarker. It's for the Android, where if you're walking along and you see somebody that's a gun owner that you think might be potentially unsafe, you can log them, their location, and put it into this app, and it will be displayed on a giant database to the rest of the world. It's snitching, just like the Gestapo would do in Nazi Germany. Get ordinary people, snitch on these people, snitch. You know, you can feel empowered. You're now a government snitch. You're spying on people. That gives you power over them. And, of course, critics are already saying there are two problems with this. First of all, as we saw when that newspaper in New York posted the names and addresses of registered gun owners, they were immediately targeted by burglars who wanted the guns. Second, you can be a gun owner and not be potentially unsafe, and just have somebody who doesn't like you type you into that application. Let's say your neighbor walks his dog on your lawn, and the dog dumps and the neighbor doesn't clean it up, and you've complained about it. And the neighbor gets this little app on his Android, and he sees you cleaning your shotgun. He says, oh, he's potentially unsafe. What does potentially unsafe really mean? We're all potentially unsafe, given the right set of circumstances. Somebody comes into your home, you're going to be potentially unsafe to that person. It's like back in the 1990s when the militant feminists were screaming, all men are potential rapists. Yeah, all women are potential whores. Doesn't mean they are one. We all have potential that we never tap into, both good and bad. Meanwhile, over in Chicago, Illinois, which is still being held up as the model of gun control legislation because guns are banned, guns are banned, guns are banned, and gun deaths are right through the roof. No big surprise there. State Representative Monique Davis is asking the governor of Illinois to deploy the National Guard on the streets of Chicago to guard against gun violence, to try and control this epidemic of violent crime. You want to control the violent crime? Repeal all the gun laws. When those violent criminals are walking down the streets, aware that any one home they're thinking about breaking into, any one person they're thinking about mugging, any woman they're thinking about raping could pull a gun out and kill them instantly, they're going to go someplace else. They're going to go to a city that has strict gun laws because it's a target-rich environment. It's a safe working environment for criminals when you have all these gun laws. Look at all these mass shootings that happened. Even though their minds were fuzzed out on SSRIs, they still went to locations that proudly proclaimed, "We are a gun-free zone. Huzzah, huzzah. Nobody can shoot back. It's a giant open-air shooting gallery." And they're off rocking and rolling here. Whoops. Sorry about that one. Now, apparently, while Congress was on summer recess, or is on summer recess, Obama says he's going to be signing that UN Small Arms Treaty. And a lot of people are very concerned about having the UN come in and say what small arms we may or may not have. Now, the treaty ostensibly targets the manufacture and distribution of small arms to third world nations where there's a great deal of violence, but could be very loosely applied to small arms in the possession of the American people. And a lot of people are upset that Obama waited until Congress was in recess and he's going to sign this thing. But you know something? It doesn't really matter. Because the president signing a treaty is only the first half of the process. Congress has to ratify it for the treaty to become law. Now, would Obama sign the treaty and then try and implement its provisions by executive order? Yes, he might. And he's operating outside his constitutional authority by doing so. And Congress might sit on its butt and do nothing about it. But it would all be illegal and unconstitutional for him to try that. All right, let's go over and talk about what's going on over there in Syria. As you know, there's been this shouting match, screaming match, back and forth between the U.S. and Russia over just who used chemical weapons on the civilians of Syria, with more and more evidence indicating it was the hired mercenaries, and photographic evidence surfaced yesterday that they were getting their source chemicals from U.S. manufacturers. The United Nations has now finally accepted Syria's invitation to have a formal investigation of their own, to go into Syria, to look at the evidence for themselves, and no longer rely on the United States version of what happened. Another major diplomatic defeat for the United States, and I imagine part of this has to do with the United Nations is just as angry as everybody else over this unrestrained surveillance and spying that the U.S. has been doing. Because, yes, NSA was spying on the United Nations as well, and they don't like it. Meanwhile, here in the United States of America, it looks like the Congress is going to put some major roadblocks before Obama and McCain's plan to send weapons to the hired mercenaries in Syria. So Obama's already out there hot and bothered to do it, but members of both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees have moved to enact stringent restrictions on sending more money and weapons to the hired mercenaries. And these restrictions may be sufficient to prevent the White House from delivering on arms shipments they've already promised to Syria. So even Congress is getting fed up with all these wars here. But not all of Congress. Carl Levin, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, is out there saying, oh, it's time for direct military strikes on Syria. Well, Carl, if you really feel that way, here's your parachute. Here's your rifle. We'll call Assad and tell him you're on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But we are tired of war. We are tired of our children being sent back home in those cheap metal boxes. We are aware that we were lied into the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and everywhere else, and we've had enough. So if you want to go have a war, Carl, you go and have it all by your lonesome. We're not going to be part of it any longer. There is no declared war declared by Congress as required by the Constitution. It's all of this Obama saying, we got to go, or Ben Bush, we got to go kill them, we got to go kill them, we've got to go kill them. Congress did pass an authorization for the use of military force in Iraq, but Bush lied to activate it. Going to take a quick phone call here. Joel in Wisconsin. Aloha, Joel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You brought up, first of all, you talked about cops going into the wrong houses and stuff.
Yes.
And then you brought up some database where you can call up and turn in somebody that's unstable with a gun.
Well, no, it says potentially unsafe was the criteria.
Okay. Well, potentially unsafe. We could call up and list every police officer or detective and everybody that's in the military and every Secret Service, fill that puppy up.
Oh, that would be a good idea. You know, that would definitely be a good idea given all these wrongful shootings and wrongful deaths here. As we pointed out earlier in the week, you're 8 times more likely to be killed by a police mistake than by a terrorist attack. So, yeah, let's everybody get that app and find the home of every police officer, FBI agent, you know, whatever. We've got one over here, had a yard sale the other day, and just put in and say, yes, he's got a gun and he's potentially unsafe. He's certainly a threat to the Constitution.
They gave it to us, use it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know, I mean, the government likes to put out these ideas like see something, say something, but they don't really mean it. Edward Snowden saw something, and he said something. They're trying to get him back in there. They put up the White House petition site. Now they're ignoring most of the petitions. Got to take a break for commercials. Joel, sorry, got to cut you off. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Oh, apparently our caller just dropped here. So we're coming up on the top of the hour, and Dr. Ron Klatz is going to be joining us talking about anti-aging medicine so we can all live long and useful lives to the money junkies. I'm not sure who would want to here. Over in the Sinai, there are some very weird developments going on there. Apparently, unknown gunmen attacked the military commander in the Sinai. And gosh, who would do a thing like that? And it comes hard on the heels of this claim by Israel that they have a green light to mount their own military operation in the Sinai. Now, following the ouster of Morsi, the Egyptian army deployed tanks and other forces into the Sinai, ostensibly to deal with smuggling tunnels into Gaza. But I think what's going on there is that the Egyptian military understands that in the middle of all this turmoil that's going on in Egypt, Israel is seeing an opportunity to retake the Sinai. And the Egyptian military is trying to deter that. And under existing treaties, they're not supposed to have too much military force in the Sinai to make it easier for Israel to retake it. And so they're pouring in all of these troops and tanks ostensibly to deal with smugglers, and Israel can't complain about that. But it looks like things are definitely heating up over there. Israel's new government is broadening its accusations against the Islamists. A lot of turmoil and confusion going on over there. Meanwhile, we're hearing a very interesting story that one of the reasons why the military decided to take over, rather than have Morsi step down and have new elections, was out of concern that the remainder of Morsi's government was still committed to supporting the U.S. agenda in Syria, and that Morsi was about to send the Egyptian military to join a ground assault against Syria's Assad. And they didn't want to do that. They don't want to see their kids being killed fighting U.S. wars in Syria. That's why this sudden turmoil inside Egypt was a major roadblock. Same thing with Turkey. Egypt and Turkey were going to be major forward bases for power projection into Syria. Now they're both wild cards. Nobody knows what's going on there. Erdogan could still be driven from office. Let's see. We talk about the extreme cost of the military. U.S. spending more on military development than the rest of the world combined. And it's all about war profiteering, just taking money from you and giving to the cronies in the military-industrial complex. It turns out the United States military has erected a 64,000 square foot headquarters building, new military base. Nobody's using it. It's sitting there empty. They spent all that money to build this military base in Afghanistan. It's not being used. It's just a good excuse to take more money away from you and give it to favored crony contractors. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're waiting to connect with Dr. Ron Klatz talking about anti-aging medicine, and he's a longtime friend, supporter of our work here, and genuinely interested in the topic. And what's really interesting is if you go to his website, he's not selling anything. He's not asking for money. It's just an information resource for people who want to look at delaying the effects of aging, especially in a society where conventional orthodox medicine seems to accelerate the aging process for so many people. So, but we'll be talking to him as soon as we have him on the line. Interesting little story. We were talking about how news is managed and orchestrated and controlled with regard to, Zimmerman, and when bad things happen, use it as a cover to put out news that ordinarily might be noticed and criticized on. Everybody always talks about how Donald Rumsfeld, then Secretary of Defense, chose September 10th, 2001, to admit to the United States that the Pentagon had managed to misplace $3 trillion. And it should have been the financial military scandal of the decade, but of course 24 hours later, 9/11 happened, and it was driven off there. Somebody sent me an interesting flashback story. This was in the Telegraph, where an aide to the Labor government issued a memo on 9/11 saying this is a good day to dump the bad news, like counselor expenses that we don't want anybody paying attention to. And so, again, as I said, everybody in government, when something happens, good or bad, the first thing they think of, how can I use this? Whether it's 9/11, the Zimmerman case, all the rest of it. All right, apparently we're not able to get a connection to Dr. Klatz. We're going to keep on trying and hope that that we get him back in here. Let me make sure that my next commercial break, I'll make sure the control room has the right phone number. Let's see, we have an interesting story. Apparently there's been another poll showing that the majority of Americans disapprove of Obama's foreign policy handling. That's not surprising. He's made a botch up out of most of it. And let's talk about the economy a little bit here. Oh, I take it back. We've got Dr. Ron Klatz on the air. Dr. Klatz, aloha. Welcome to the show. We've only got a couple of minutes before the commercial break, but what's on your mind today?
Well, it's always good to hear from you, Michael. Well, I'm happy to discuss anything. I think right now the interesting issue is what's going on in the field of anti-aging medicine. That we have incredible technologies, miracles every day that can extend the healthy human lifespan by 10, 15, 20 years for the average individual, and the incredible thing is that people are not aware of it and they're not taking advantage of it, and every day it's more important than the day before to take care of your health, because we're being attacked on all fronts, air, sea, by water, by our foods, with toxins. And the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, a medical society of 26,000 physicians and scientists from 120 countries, is out there and is moving the field ahead.
Well, as I was mentioning before we got you on the phone, the important thing about your website is it's not a sales website. They're not little bottles with price tags on them. It's an information resource. But I think, and we've talked about this, and when we come back from the commercials, we'll talk about it again, why people may be less focused on the idea of anti-aging at this particular time in our nation's history. And we're going to have to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with Dr. Ron Klatz and anti-aging after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dr. Ron Klatz from the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And I know, Ron, you and I, in our private conversations, you were expressing this mystification that even though your website is basically just handing out information and resources for free, you're not trying to sell a product to anybody, that you weren't really seeing the kind of traffic and volume you thought the subject would attract. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Right now, I'm sure that all of the doctors and medical professionals in the United States who are still truly interested in the health and wellness and longevity of their patients are realizing that the American public as a whole has grown very distrustful of the medical establishment coming out of pharmaceutical industries with their very reckless handling of vaccines. They're certainly very concerned about the abuses of Obamacare, and that may be an aspect where they're sort of tarnishing all the medical professionals with this brush that is really being caused by a much narrower group of money-driven pharmacists and practitioners. The second aspect has to do with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, Maslow was this psychologist who postulated that people tend to be conscious about their immediate needs, and if the immediate needs are not being met, their brains literally don't waste any effort thinking about anything beyond that. And he envisioned this little pyramid, and at the bottom of the pyramid was, where am I going to get my next meal? And then if you had food security, you moved up to the next level of the pyramid saying, I want housing security. Further on up, you start thinking about long-term future, at which point people would be thinking about, I'd like to delay the aging process, up to the very top, which Maslow termed as self-actualization, which is one of these fuzzy terms nobody really knows what he means. And I think for the vast majority of Americans, they're jammed onto that bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy, and they're so worried about making sure their mortgage is paid or their rent is paid and keeping food on the table. This idea of thinking about keeping themselves young 20, 30, 40 years into the future, it's just something they're not sensitive to. And this gets into something I call the new nihilism, where if you go back and you look at all of the major wars in history, they're followed by a period of social malaise, where people who have experienced firsthand that everything they could work for, plan for, anticipate can be taken away in the blink of an eye by government misstep, invasion, explosion, and they develop very much a live for now and I'm not worried about the future attitude. I know in the wake of the Vietnam War, there was almost a joke going around about live fast, die young, leave a good-looking corpse. And I don't think that it's a case of people not really being all that concerned about delaying the aging effects, especially from the onslaught of all these toxins in our foods and cosmetics and household products and pharmaceuticals. It's that we're struggling with this idea of just getting through today. And how would you counter that? I mean, again, I think it's an important point to make that this anti-aging medicine is really also about mitigating some of these negative effects coming out of chemicals that are in our food. In fact, before I let you speak, I'm going to give you another example. We were talking the other week about propylene glycol, which we've discovered aggravates my wife's joints problems, and we found it in some cosmetics she was using. We went to the store yesterday. My wife had a sweet tooth. We were going to get her a cake and some whipped cream. And the first can of whipped cream that we pulled out of the dairy counter had propylene glycol as an ingredient you're going to eat. And so we went back and we found one that was more natural products. And so let's talk about how this anti-aging process is really about getting rid of these toxins in our environment and our lives that are actually triggering early aging.
Well, you're right, Mike, and perhaps it's the term itself. Really, anti-aging medicine is a euphemism for advanced preventive medicine, and you're not going to get to see a healthy 70 years of age, or 80 years of age, or 90 years of age if your body is loaded with crud, whether that be radioactive fallout from Fukushima that found its way over on the jet stream, or whether it be the massive amount of untested chemicals that they're putting into our environment through all kinds of means, whether it be drinks or food or the water supply or venting of chemicals from our mattresses and everything else that surrounds us. I mean, we're living in a completely unnatural environment, and people, if they want to live healthy, forget about an extended lifespan. If you just say, hey, I want to live the average of 78 years of age in the United States, let's not talk about the possibilities of 100, 110, 120, which I think are available to most baby boomers today, then you have to focus on detoxification. You have to focus on what you eat and what your environment is. You have to take extraordinary steps. I mean, many people I know, almost all physicians I know and all health professionals are drinking distilled water, or it's at least bottled water. They're careful about trying to avoid GMO foods, and people who are a little bit more in the know are also putting air purifiers in at least their bedroom, because there's so much toxicity that surrounds us. By the way, our website of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine is worldhealth.net. And as you said, it's a non-commercial website. All this information is for free, and that's really what astounds me is that we spend a huge amount of time and money scouring the world's scientific literature, looking for information that's going to improve the quality, the quantity of your life, hopefully. But certainly, it's going to address issues such as the prevention of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and all the toxins in your environment. And the website is just there. It's a public service. It's a public charity, actually. And we do it because this is the type of medicine that we love, and this is the kind of medicine that most people really want for themselves and their family. And it's interesting that you mentioned, with all the stresses that the doctors are under in the environment now, with the political environment, the economic environment, the doctors who practice anti-aging medicine tend to be the guys who are more the Marcus Welby types, the kind of guys you really want as your family physician.
Well, I think maybe when you're out there talking about living to be 100 years old, I think probably many people could be forgiven for thinking, well, we're getting into, just kind of make-believe attitude here. I really do think we ought to sort of rebrand this whole subject as a way of dealing with this chemical onslaught that we are in the middle of. We understand.
Well, you're right. That's a big part. But just to be clear, in Monaco, which has the longest life expectancy in the world right now, life expectancies are pushing 91 and a half years of age. And that's insane. And why is that? It's because, well, Monaco's a very wealthy country. They don't have GMO foods. They're careful about what they eat. They avoid toxicity. And they also have the highest per capita number of anti-aging physicians on the planet.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, again, I think where more people are going to respond to this is in dealing with the fact that our government allows these very horrible chemicals in our food. We were talking yesterday about 10 common foods being sold in U.S. supermarkets that are already banned for consumption in other countries. We know Hungary just recently took the extreme step of literally burning every field with GMO in their nation. They know it's a problem, and I think when you are living in a country where the government says it's okay for corporations to feed you toxins because, hey, that will generate revenue for the medical establishment when you go over to treat the symptoms, I think you need to start looking for that portion of the medical establishment that is still committed to the idea of prevention rather than endless supplies of money for treating the symptoms. And it's kind of interesting because your approach to health reminds me very much of the philosophy of Chinese medicine, where you pay your doctor while you're healthy. And if you get sick, the money to the medical establishment stops. And so the incentive there is to keep the population healthy. And we're not just talking about racking up scores and saying I made it to 80 or 90 or the rest of it. We want to have an old age in which we're still active. And I know a lot of people are very much afraid. They have an image of old age, of sitting in a little tiny room in some little aid home where somebody's coming by to wipe the drool off your chin every 15 minutes, and nobody really wants to live like that. So it's really about wanting to have an active old age, to enjoy that retirement that the system is supposed to be promising us and is already failing to deliver. And the reason I support you and your work here isn't that I'm anticipating living to be 80 or 90, although all of my grandparents certainly did. It is, having gone through what I went through with my wife with the formaldehyde precursors and now the propylene glycol, just the awareness that the worst enemy of your health in this country is that corporate organized health system with the big pharma, the HMOs, and it's now all being enshrined in Obamacare, and we need to acknowledge...
Obamacare is HMO on steroids.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's amazing what they are trying to do, and the worst part of it is, I don't know whether it's the worst because I haven't even seen Obamacare full out yet, but from what I'm reading, one of the worst things is that they have criminal penalties for doctors who do not follow their dictates. So if you misbill, or if you make mistakes, or if you don't follow the formulary, or you prescribe the wrong medications, et cetera, there literally are penalties involved in it, some of them criminal, which would put you in jail.
For not selling the recommended pharmaceutical product there. Ron, stay with me. I want to keep you into the next segment. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dr. Ronald Klatz from the American Institute of Anti-Aging Medicine. We've just linked his website to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. We're also running an ad for him down in our little content banner section. And before I give you back the microphone, Ron, I want to relate a little story. I have been very, very critical of the for-profit medical establishment on this show and on my website because it is for-profit. And when you have a for-profit medical establishment, chronically ill people are a financial resource. They're a revenue stream. And I discovered myself over the years that you can go to these money junkie medical establishments, corporations, and spend a lot of money and not get any healthier. But there's a second medicine out there, which is available pretty much for free if you're willing to go and do the research. And again, the example I want to use was my wife Claire went through years of serious crippling joint pain, which for somebody who is a musician, it was like an early death. She couldn't play keyboard, she couldn't play guitar, couldn't play harp. And it was very painful to watch her having to go through this. And we went the organized, orthodox, for-profit medical establishment for years, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. They even had her on SSRIs, which just really were prescribed off-label, but they were making money and they were very expensive. And then through our own research, reading online, on the net, at websites like Dr. Ron's website, we found the answer ourselves. And we didn't have to spend any money to make Claire well, okay? And so this is what it's all about. Behind the facade of the corporate medical establishment, there is a second medicine out there of people genuinely interested in prevention, nutrition, and cure. And the information is out there. You can find it for free if you're willing to go look, and that's what Dr. Ron Klatz's website is all about. It is a free resource. They're not selling anything. They don't charge you a membership. It's a free resource to go out and start looking at ideas to help deal with this chemical onslaught. You're literally under constant attack from all these chemicals the corporations are putting in the food to make you want to buy and eat more, stuff that simply makes it last longer so they can save a few bucks on product loss. And there's a complete disregard for the health of the American people and the people around the world subjected to these products. And I really do think that maybe you ought to start de-emphasizing the anti-aging aspect of what you have on your website and really start pushing the idea that these are techniques and methods and common sense approaches to reducing the harmful effects of this chemical soup that we find ourselves living in day to day.
Well, you're absolutely right, Mike. I mean, an awful lot of the disease that's out there is environmental. It's the toxins that we're exposed to. And if you can just clean up your act, if you can clean up your environment, things get better very, very quickly and very, very cheaply. WorldHealth.net, the website, our website, www.worldhealth.net, has over 8,000 pages on it, and there's tens of thousands of referenced articles that are cited, and most of these have to do with issues of the prevention of cancer, diabetes, detoxification, nutritional medicine. Only about 20% of what we talk about is aesthetic. And you're right, there's this misunderstanding of what anti-aging medicine is, and maybe that's really the problem. But needless to say, there's this incredible website out there with a tremendous amount of information. And you can sign up for a free newsletter, and every week you'll get the results of myself and my staff, who scour about 400 medical journals every month, looking for what's new and exciting and what's helpful for people. And this is life-saving information. I mean, just this this week we have articles on how, and this is from Nature magazine. These are from top-tier journals. how researchers in Japan have been able to grow liver buds in cell culture. And what that means is we're very close to being able to, through stem cells or through cell culturing mechanisms, grow new liver tissue for people who have liver failure. I mean, that alone would save hundreds of thousands of lives every year. It's very close, and this is the first research that really talks about it and how close this research is. There's a report that shows that there is a new technology for detecting lung cancer from a breath test. This was done by researchers in Korea, and the technology is so simple that they're talking about putting it into cell phones, and so you can just breathe into into your cell phone and have a cancer test.
And the NSA will instantly know whether you're healthy or not here. We're coming up on another commercial break. Ron, I'd like you to stick with me into the next segment here. Folks, just because it's free doesn't mean it's worthless. Yes, it'll take reading. Yes, it'll take research and study. But anything that's being presented to you on a silver platter on those TV commercials is there to get your money. And you're going to have to work to find your answers. I learned that with Claire. You need to learn it for yourself. We'll be back after these. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dr. Ronald Klatz about the American Institute of Anti-Aging Medicine. We've got his website linked to the front page of my website. And I think everybody listening to this show, you might want to stop and think for a minute. I understand right now our awareness and our conscience is focused on the next week, the next month, maybe the next year. But we understand we live in a country in which the government does not have a problem with corporations pouring toxins into the environment, because if it makes us sick, it's another profit opportunity. And I have a hard time understanding how people can sit in their living room watching the TV, proclaiming the latest patented designer medication with that little voice at the end droning on and on about how this medication could actually kill you, and if it does, it's not our fault because we warned you, and still go down to their doctors and say, ooh, I want to try that pill. And if you really want the TV to control your life and your health, that's fine. But if you want to take charge of your health and wellness, you're going to have to take responsibility to go and find out how. Because that TV set, that corporate media outlet that you're listening to, they're there to sell you products. They're there to sell you the new pill. They're there to sell you the new war, the new president, the new policy, the new tax. They are not interested in what's actually good for you. You're going to have to go and find that for yourself. And once you start searching, you will find that there are still medical professionals out there like Dr. Klatz who are genuinely interested in doing what is right and best for the patient. And if you go to his website, yes, it'll take a lot of work and study and research on your part, but that's what taking responsibility for your health and wellness really entails. And like I said, I have been through this with my wife. I've been through it with me. I'm going to be 61 here in another couple of months, and I don't seem to so far have gotten the accumulation of chronic ailments that other men my age seem to have. And I hold that in contrast with my youngest brother, who we lost a little while ago, who had gone the orthodox medical route, had all these pills in his cabinet, and his health just deteriorated. He suffered a stroke, and then finally he passed away. We obviously have a similar genetic makeup. And again, we know some of these environmental assaults on us are very dangerous. I mean, now they're finally coming out and they're documenting that this epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis that has struck the American population is directly linked to the use of peanut oil as an adjuvant in vaccines. Now, peanut oil is something you are supposed to eat and digest, not plunge intravenously into your blood system. And we see time and again this recklessness in the application of these new patented whiz-bang technologies that make money. And I think it's time to pull back from that. And looking at your website, Ron, most of what's in there, once you look at it and read it, it's really a lot of common sense stuff that people are going to look at and say, oh, well, God, that makes so much sense. Why haven't we been doing that all along? Ron, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners before we kick you loose?
Well, just the important thing is that, your health is your most important issue. I mean, you can, I think Jack LaLanne said it best. He says, a man will trade trade his health for wealth, and in the end, all it'll buy for him is a stone. And we are in an amazing time in history. We're in a very sad time from a point of public freedoms and democracy, and it's very worrying to a lot of Americans. I mean, I worry about it every day. But from a scientific and medical point of view and health point of view, we live in the most amazing and wonderful times. There are miracles every day. I mean, I was just reading this morning about how researchers have been able to splice together the spine of a mouse, the severed spine, and the mouse is now able to have a function from that severed spinal cord that was lost, and is able to walk again and able to move. And this is now very close to application in people. So we're again close to another miracle breakthrough in healthcare, and these happen every single day. And www.worldhealth.net reports on these breakthroughs, and they also report on more common use things like how to take vitamin E or C or D, and how to protect your health with sunlight and with clean water, and how to detoxify your body, and how to keep your skin looking young and healthy. And there are 26,000 doctors associated with the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, and these 26,000 doctors are not the kind of guys you're talking about who are plugged into the profit-making pharmaceutical industries. And I don't want to give all pharmaceuticals a bad name, because many of them are life-saving. But there are some that, that, as you say, are, may not be causing the greatest good for humanity that they can. But our doctors are practicing the type of medicine that I think you'd be proud of, that you'd be proud to have a doctor practicing. So finding a physician through the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine might not be the worst thing in the world, because at least this doctor knows more than just to write a prescription. He knows about nutritional medicine, he knows about lifestyle, he knows about detoxification. Thank you so much, Michael. It's been my honor to be on your show. And again, people who are interested, it's a free website. It's www.worldhealth.net, and you can sign up for a free newsletter and learn about all the breakthroughs in healthcare that are going to give you a healthier, happier, longer lifespan.
Well, thank you, Dr. Klatz, for spending time with us again today. And again, there's the corporatized medical establishment that's all about making money, but there are people who went into medicine out of some very noble motives. And just as we understand that despite all these horrible stories about brutal police tactics, that there are people who are in the police force who did join the police department out of a sincere desire to serve their community. But it's up to you to hunt down the good ones and ignore the bad ones. I remember a story we covered here about 2 weeks ago about how doctors are so fed up with all of these dictates coming down from the health insurance companies that they're simply not accepting health insurance anymore. And they found out the reduction in their paperwork overhead was so great, they could actually lower their fees to their patients and sort of go back to that family doctor model again. And we need to start learning to discern between services and products that are offered to us to make some money junkie a lot of money versus products and services that are being put out there by people who genuinely take pride in doing a good job at what they do. And it's a model we need to get back to. And again, as I've said before on the show, I don't have a problem with people wanting to make money. I really, really don't. But it can't be the sole priority to guide a society. It has to be balanced with other priorities, including the health and wellness of the people. And this almost gets back to a comment I was making the other day when we were talking about Gasland 2, where the oil and gas companies are out there, they're fracking all across the country, the methane is bubbling up from below, and it's making people sick, and the gas companies are thinking, well, we've got to get the gas, we've got to have the gas and oil to sell to our consumers. But if you poison and kill off large numbers of those consumers, your profits are going to die in the long run. Unfortunately, most corporate executives are only thinking in terms of the next stockholders' meeting, and maybe we need to rethink that model. Maybe we need to rethink that model. And again, we understand corporations are going to behave like corporations. We relied on, futilely, obviously, the federal government to stand as an arbitrator between the needs and desires of business and the needs and desires of the general population. And when government abandons taking care of the people and goes over to the side of the corporations, that's fascism. And if you study any fascist society in history, you will see exactly the same abuses that we see here. Poor quality medicine at a very high cost being promoted in the media. And the same media, of course, is actually trying to smear and denigrate people like Dr. Klatz and his website. Say, oh, they're kooks, they're a green tree hugger, you don't want to talk to those. And we've seen that kind of tactic time and time again. And again, if you want to sit there and let the corporate media force feed you what you're supposed to think, what you're supposed to buy, what you're supposed to do, that's all well and good. But we understand we live in an age where that is really not to be trusted. And the reason I am such a strong supporter of Dr. Klatz and what he's doing is because even before we met him and talked to him, the experiences I went through with my wife and her joint issues absolutely hammered home the fact that if you're dealing with a for-profit medical establishment, it is a for-profit medical establishment. They're there to sell product. Not one of those doctors we went to ever said, maybe there's an environmental contaminant that is triggering this. Not one of them. And when we went back to one of her doctors with this information about the formaldehyde, they looked at us like we were aliens from another planet. And we said, we don't want the prescriptions anymore. We don't want this. We found the problem. We solved it for ourselves. You can't do that. I'm the doctor. And so anyway, it's worldhealth.net. We've got it linked there. It's free. It's not going to cost you anything to go and poke around if you're dealing with some kind of a chronic problem that the orthodox for-profit medical establishment can't seem to deal with. It's time for you to take control of your own health and wellness. Take responsibility for finding out what's really going on. Every time I've gone out to the web to research the possibility that symptoms we're suffering are related to the environment, there's always a ton of material. Corporate media won't cover it, of course. In the case of the SSRIs, Congress actually investigated and then decided they didn't want to do anything because they didn't want to lose those big pharmaceutical contributions. The stuff you need to know to be well, to be healthy, to stay active and productive for your entire life, it's out there to find. You just have to know that you have to go look for it. That's all we're saying here. Now, as I said before in the show, I'm going to be 61 here in a couple of months, and I'm not happy about it. But, you know, I'm in the middle of losing all this weight and taking care of my health. I stay away from doctors. I don't even remember the last time I went down to see a doctor. And I have health insurance. They're making bucks off of me. And I just stay away. And I understand at my age, sooner or later, something will happen where I'll have to go into the doctor and, you know, have them do something. But the longer I stay away, the better off I seem to be compared to my contemporaries. I'm not a Christian Scientist, but, you know, if I break a leg, I'll go get a cast put on it. But, again, watching what happened to my youngest brother, where all of a sudden he reached his 30s and said, I'm going to get serious about my health. And he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, you've got this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. And they put him on all these medications. And his health deteriorated from then on forward. All right, enough about that stuff. Some news stories we're going to finish up the day with. Remember yesterday we were talking about Washington, D.C., and the city council was looking at passing a living wage mandate to basically say, forget the official federal minimum wage. Nobody can live on that anyway. We require a living wage in the District of Columbia of at least $12.50. And Walmart came in and said, if you dare pass that, we'll close down all of our stores in the District of Columbia. To their credit, Washington, D.C. City Council passed the bill mandating a higher living wage, despite Walmart's bullying and threatening. Now we'll see if Walmart is going to walk their talk or not. My guess is that'll be the last they ever say about it, but personally, I think it might be not a bad thing for some of these big box stores to start fading away and make way for locally produced varieties of products that people can support our local economy with, because we can't go on any further this path of being the world's token consumers of products made in other countries, because we have nothing to send back to them to balance the trade. Hardly anybody wants to buy anything America manufactures anymore because it's all been value engineered and planned obsolescence to the point of uselessness. Nobody wants to buy our agriculture because of the GMO scandal. And even our weapons sales are in decline because of the huge failures and disasters with some of those. Now, apparently down in Ecuador, there was a bit of a kerfuffle where Chevron was convicted of dumping 18.5 billion, with a B, gallons of toxic waste into the Amazon River. Chevron has now gone back to court, and in a rather amazing and alarming court decision, the court has ordered the internet data for all of the activists who were part of this class action suit to be given to Chevron, because Chevron is planning to sue on the grounds there was a conspiracy to harm Chevron. And they didn't really do anything wrong with this 18.5 billion gallons of toxic waste in the Amazon. There was a conspiracy to harm Chevron's corporate image. Ever notice how the government has this attitude that the conspiracies that favor them in corporations are real, and the conspiracies we see being used against us are just junk and kooks, tinfoil hat stuff? Meanwhile, Senator Elizabeth Warren is introducing a new revived Glass-Steagall Act to Congress to try and rein in the out-of-control, too-big-to-jail banks. It's a little late. They've had 14 years with which to strip mine the wealth of the American people with their out-of-control financial shenanigans. So, horses out of the barn. I hope it passes. I don't think it will. There was an earlier attempt to reimpose Glass-Steagall. Congress voted it down. Why? Wall Street, huge campaign contributors, good buddies out on the golf course, good drinking buddies. We don't want to anger them. In the United States of America, banks are far more important than human beings. We've got way too many human beings as it is. We need less humans and more banks. Now, speaking of banks, this is a story that came out of Economic Times asking if the breakup of the Eurozone is already starting. We know 2 weeks ago they were talking about having actually two versions of the euro, one for the countries that actually have a decent economy and a different second euro for all those countries that are falling apart, in order to claim that the euro has not defaulted and protect Wall Street from that $90 trillion in credit default swaps that they sold without having cash reserves on hand to make payments out there. So, let's see, Greece is getting a staggered bailout payments to keep them going on the grounds of implementing even more austerity measures and massive public sector layoffs within the next 10 days. Won't fix the problem. Those public sector workers do not have private sector jobs to go to. It's a failed concept, and still they're out there pushing it. Why? I have a speculation when we come back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about how Greece has been given enough money to avoid default. Again, they're protecting Wall Street's credit default swaps on the condition that within the next 10 days, Greece enact even more austerity. Massive public sector layoffs. So what's going on here? Is it simply a holding action trying to hold off the inevitable collapse of this Ponzi scheme banking empire? Or are all these countries that have been enslaved by these private central banks being driven to a point of collapse in order for these bankers who have these legalized counterfeiting operations to simply come in and buy it all up and be the owners of it all, which only works if you believe it's real? This whole debt-based economic system only functions because people are brainwashed into believing this is the way the world is supposed to be. And it's exactly the same scam that they went through when the world was being governed by rule by divine right. God has appointed me your ruler, so you must do what I say. And as long as the masses were brainwashed into thinking that was real, they would do as they were told, because they believed it was real. Same thing with slavery. You must do what I say because I have a piece of paper that says I own your physical person. You're not a human being. You are chattel. You are my property. Do as I tell you. And the vast majority of slaves did as they were told because they had been brainwashed to believing this was the way the world was supposed to work. And we see exactly the same scam today, where we have the scammers out there saying, I have this piece of paper that says you owe me $72 trillion, and until it's paid off, you must do what I tell you. And of course, it can't be paid off, because all new currency entering circulation is just another loan at interest to always keep the debt greater than the available money supply, to keep mankind enslaved to these private central bankers. And it only works as long as you believe it. Only as long as you believe this is the way the world is supposed to be. And it isn't. And it's been known for a long time. There are other ways to organize a society. That's what the American Revolution was all about. Breaking the chains to a private central bank that commanded everybody to only conduct commerce with banknotes borrowed at interest from that private bank, the Bank of England. And we had a corrupted, corruptible government of the United States of America sold us all back into that same system 100 years ago. And 100 years is enough. We don't need a Barack Obama in the White House. We need another Andrew Jackson who shut down the Second Bank of the United States. We need another Abraham Lincoln who took the money creation away from the banks and put it back in the government where the Constitution said it was supposed to be. We need another John F. Kennedy who took money creation back from the private bankers and put it back into the hands of the government where the Constitution says it should be. All right, I hear the music. It's time for me to calm down, take a break, go out and do errands. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Buy your physical silver and gold from Republic Trading Group, and aloha, America.